All right, kia ora and welcome everybody. So I'm firstly going to hand us over to Iris Pahu, who's going to start with a karakia, a tematanga and a mihi. So over to you, Iris.
Inga mana, inga reo, inga rauranga tira mā, tēnā koutou. Me ngā rangatira o te pai kōrero, e whakatūwhere a tātou hui i tēnei wā, tēnā koutou. Nau mai, haere mai, ki te Raupapatanga i te roimata hui i tēnei wā. Tēnā koutou, kia ora hui tātou katoa. He karakia he timatanga e whakatūwhere a tātou hui. Inoi tātou. Ki ngā tapu o te ao te kupu, tēnei inoi whakatapua tēnei wāhi, tēnei tauranga tangata ki te wairua whakahihiri. Tohia nuku, tohia rangi, tohia ki te pauwhaitua e tipu ere ki te tirohanga kanohi. Whakareia papatua nuku mo ake tonu, haramai te toki, haumi e, hui e, tāiki. Ho atu te rākau, ngā mihi atu kia koutou katoa, kia koe Rochelle.
Kia ora, ko Ronya tukuingoa. Rochelle has just exited by accident. So we are going to go straight to Sue Barker from Charities Law Reform. So over to you, please.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. Tēnā koutou katoa. Hello, everyone. And welcome to this part of today's discussion about Charities Law Reform, why it matters. In some ways, the question to my mind is really asking, does the charitable sector matter? And I fully appreciate that many charities are struggling at the moment with revenue streams tightening, demand for services increasing, costs increasing, and volunteers becoming increasingly difficult to find. And when you're focused on survival, as I know many are, it can be difficult to lift your head above the parapet and think about wider systemic issues. I completely understand. But in my view, it is nevertheless critical that we do that. One of the most important things we could do, in my view, to maximise our chances of being able to build back better in response to COVID-19, and in fact, to build the kind of society that we want to live in, is to get the framework of charities law right. Just to put the charitable sector in context, in some of the Western literature, and I acknowledge it as Western literature, society is thought of as having four distinct sectors: business, government, and the for-purpose sector, with family occupying the space in between. I'm calling it the for-purpose sector, but it has a number of other names, such as the not-for-profit sector, the tangata whenua community and voluntary sector, the third sector, civil society. To be honest, I think the lack of agreement on the name is a reflection of the diversity of the sector itself, and it's something to be celebrated and embraced. But whatever you want to call it, the charitable sector is a subset of it. I think of the charitable sector as all entities that are registered under the Charities Act or that are eligible to be registered under the Charities Act. In other words, all charities. Registration under the Charities Act is important because it's the gateway to a number of privileges, and not just tax privileges such as income tax exemption and donee status and others, but also often access to funding. A lot of funders, rightly or wrongly, will only fund registered charities. Registration can also unlock access to corporate discounts and other corporate support, and it can also impact on an entity's ability to attract volunteers and members. And increasingly, these privileges are being restricted to registered charities only, which means it is very important that decisions about who can get onto the register, the charities register, and who can stay there, it's very important that we get them right. Registration can effectively make the difference between life or death for an entity. And in that sense, it affects not only the entities themselves, but also to all the people they might work with or help. And ultimately, it extends to society generally, in my view. Decisions about registration have an impact that is far-reaching with significant implications for our society generally. Sadly, the charitable sector is often undervalued or overlooked. It is often viewed in isolation or simply ignored altogether. It can be invisible to decision makers. Why is that? It may be because traditionally decisions based on measuring value have focused on monetary value. The business sector makes money and therefore it's considered important. The for-purpose sector, by contrast, is motivated by values other than profit, and therefore perhaps its value might have traditionally been discounted. But this view doesn't take into account the fact that the charitable sector collectively has some $58 billion of assets under management. Its contribution to GDP is approximately equivalent to Fonterra, New Zealand's largest company, or the construction sector, I understand. It also has more than 230,000 volunteers and 180,000 paid staff. It is a significant sector, even if we are measuring things in a traditional way. But it is even more significant when we take into account the fact that this government has a focus on well-being. Whatever it is that government wants to achieve, whether it be in the areas of health, education, housing, poverty reduction, reducing inequalities, protecting the environment, taking action to combat the impact of climate change, well-being generally, whatever it might be, the charitable sector can help. We are apparently $23 trillion short of being able to meet the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. The short point is that governments cannot do it alone. We need to work together, civil society, government, and the business sector. Most importantly, we need to unlock and unleash the potential of civil society. The key gateway to charitable registration is the definition of charitable purpose, and one of the key issues in the context of Charities Law Reform is the way the definition is being interpreted. If you interpret it too narrowly, it becomes seen as an old-fashioned, paternalistic, colonialist, Victorian concept of handouts to the poor that's seen more as a symptom of the problem rather than as part of the solution. When you view it this way, charities become seen as underfunded service delivery arms of government, and they're basically restricted to waiting until people have fallen off a cliff before being able to help them. I have never seen the concept of charity that way. In my view, the concept of charity is wide, strengths-based, nuanced. It can be a key incubator of innovative solutions to intractable problems. Charities can reach into areas that governments cannot. And we saw firsthand during lockdown how important the charitable sector is to New Zealand. Charities have a proud history of catalysing much-needed social change and are an important builder of social capital, the glue that holds societies together. It's a way of devolving decision-making to local communities. Communities know best what communities need, and in my view, the charitable sector is one of the most important ways of achieving that. But if the definition is being interpreted too narrowly, we get these fault lines. We get these areas where charities are being prevented from doing their work. There are so many of them. I've listed a few here, but there are many more. I'm aware I've only got 10 minutes, so I will move a bit quickly. I apologise for that, but I'd be happy to discuss any point at a later stage if required. But social capital, in my view, is one of the most important things that the charitable sector contributes. And this is a quote from Sir Stuart Etherington, who was the head of the National Council of Voluntary Organisations in the UK, which is broadly the equivalent of HUIA in England and Wales. And he makes the point that civil society is essential to building a strong society. It is charity and volunteering that allow people to find identity, meaning and purpose, a sense of autonomy, pride and utility. It's often how we find balance in our lives, pursue our passions or fight for change. And for society at large, it's how we build stronger communities, give people a say in what happens to them. It's how we provide services that people depend upon, develop new ways of doing things, and nurture the people who will lead our future. So in my view, the charitable sector is fundamentally important to our society, and it follows that getting the framework of charities law right is also fundamentally important. I'm conscious of time, and I was asked to give a bit of a background to where we've got to now in terms of the Charities Act review. So I'm going to move reasonably quickly through these slides. I apologise for that. But basically, in order to understand the Charities Act and the reform that might be made to it, it's important to look at the problem that the Charities Act was trying to fix. prior to the Charities Act in 2005, charities in New Zealand enjoyed extremely high levels of public trust and confidence. The problem was information. Because there was no register, there was no formal process of reporting, it was considered that the public had no protection against charities. Anybody could stand on a street corner and rattle a bucket, and you wouldn't know if they were actually working for a charity, you wouldn't know if their charity was legitimate, and most importantly, you wouldn't know what happened to the money. And as a result, the integrity and reputation of the entire charitable sector was vulnerable to the inevitable presence of a few rogue charities. There was also no way of knowing whether a charity was subject to mission drift, whether it was continuing to act in furtherance of its stated purposes over time. By the time the original Charities Bill was introduced into Parliament in 2004, there was overwhelming support from within the charitable sector for a Charities Commission to be established to administer a charities register to address these concerns, to provide a forum for accountability so that any particular charity could have a means of showing to the world that it was worthy to support, and to have a means for addressing and weeding out serious wrongdoing. It was not about the government exercising operational control over the day-to-day decisions that charities might make about how they might further their charitable purposes. It is important that we bear in mind that the charitable sector is independent of government. It is a separate sector from government. So moving quickly, by the time the Charities Bill was introduced into Parliament in 2004, it had been preceded by almost 20 years' worth of reports. I've coloured them in different colours, blue for National and red for Labour. The Charities Bill was introduced and passed during the third term of a three-term Labour government. The Labour government accepted the recommendations of the Working Party on the registration, reporting and monitoring of charities and began work to set up a Charities Commission. The Working Party specifically noted that it should be a Charities Commission, not a business unit within DIA. They said this was important as it would mean the costs of monitoring enforcement are likely to be less if the sector supports and has confidence in the organisation. Any lesser alternative would fail to adequately recognise the importance and independence of the charitable sector. So after such a long gestation process, one might have hoped they would have got it right. However, concern was expressed that that may not have been the case. The original bill was widely regarded as fundamentally flawed, and it was almost completely rewritten at Select Committee stage in response to hundreds of submissions. It was based on the Companies Act, criticised for being conceived in Treasury and designed in the Ministry of Economic Development. And the comment was made in Parliament as those changes were subject to very limited consultation only. We do not know what we are passing tonight or what the implications might be. The National Party members of the Select Committee noted that the consultation process was inadequate, and they made the point that the devil is in the detail, and if the bill gets it wrong, as the first draft definitely did, the charitable sector will pay the price, and we will see many charitable organisations close. There is the possibility that there are a number of structural issues in the bill remaining unaddressed, and without a further period of consultation with the sector, it is difficult to fully identify these. There are indeed a number of structural issues in the Charities Act as passed, and in my view, the New Zealand charitable sector is indeed paying the price. So remaining stages were passed through under urgency, all passed through on one day. Concerns that fast law does not make good law were appeased. The then Minister of Finance, the Honourable Michael Cullen, said that the review would be, that the Act would be subject to a full first principles post-implementation review. So it was a case of try it and see, and we'll have a look at it in a while. So far, so good. But the Act has passed is full of unintended consequences. These are a few. Be very happy to talk about them, but in the interest of time, moving on. Since the Act was passed in 2005, it has also been subject to a series of piecemeal amendments. Some might call them knee-jerk amendments that have again been rushed through under urgency without proper consultation. And again, these too are full of unintended consequences. This particular one in 2016, when there was an attempt made to remove charities' rights of appeal, led to it being Labour Party policy to consult with the sector on whether the establishment of the Charities Commission has resulted in improved services and information for the sector, to prioritise the long-promised review of the Charities Act, beginning with a first principles review and updating and widening the definition of charitable purpose, and ensure that community and voluntary organisations can engage in advocacy without fear of losing their charitable status. That was the platform on which the Labour Party went into the 2017 election, which they won, which was a surprise at the time. They won the election, and then the review was announced in November 2017, and draft terms of reference was circulated to the sector group. But unfortunately, the draft terms of reference that were circulated to the sector group did not reflect Labour Party policy. There were significant concerns about the nature, scope and timing of the review. The nature was a concern because the review had been given to the DIA. So effectively we have the DIA reviewing itself. The scope of the review was a concern because it was not a first principles review, and key issues such as the definition of charitable purpose were specifically outside scope. And the timing was a significant concern because the government wanted the entire review to be completed within the last term of government, which would have required all the policy work and legislation to be completed within 3 years. But the sector group communicated these concerns, but they were basically ignored, and the terms of reference were finalised in that form in May 2018. The review commenced. You'll be aware we had the discussion document, the DIA's discussion document in February 2019, followed by a period of public consultation. And the time period for submissions was extended. The sector group was instrumental, and they did make some progress in terms of getting the time frame extended, which is very helpful. 363 submissions were received. A summary of submissions was released in December 2019. And those submissions are an extremely rich source of information about how the regime is working. Basically, the charitable sector has spoken. But then the review kind of got refined to 3 issues. I agree that the reporting requirements for small charities is a key issue, but those 2 issues, charities, business activities and accumulation of funds, have come straight from the tax working group, which again treated charities as an afterthought. So that gave rise to concern that the review was perhaps being overtaken by tax. But then a global pandemic intervened, and in May 2020 the review was paused for 6 months due to COVID. There was another general election in September 2020, October 2020. The new minister, the Honourable Priyanka Radhakrishnan, gave a speech to Charity Services annual meeting in December last year, saying that she was reading the summary of submissions and she wanted to honour them and wanted to proceed with care. And those comments were extremely welcome. So that was all I really wanted to say. In my view, these are some of the key issues that we need to address by means of a review. But I guess the main point is that we need to look at these issues properly. It needs to be done in consultation with the sector, ideally co-designed with the sector. And if we all put our heads together, I've always said no one of us knows what a world-leading framework of charities law might look like. But if we all put our heads together, we might be able to come up with something amazing, and we might be able to unleash the power and the potential of the charitable sector to all of our advantage. And if you are interested, there's more information on our website, charitiesLawReform.nz. We have a LinkedIn group, and you're very welcome to join into Charity Law, and also a Facebook page, Charities Act Review. I think it's 2020 now. But that was all I had. Thank you.
So a wealth of background information to set the scene. Just to let everybody know that we'll publish that PowerPoint afterwards. So if you want to reflect back on that, you can have time to read through it. So now we're going to turn over to our fantastic guests. We've got 3 speakers with us today, going to speak for about 5 minutes each, and then we'll have a 15-minute panel discussion. You'll have opportunities to make comment, ask questions of them, etc. So firstly, I want to introduce Elizabeth Kerekere. Thank you so much for joining us, Elizabeth. I know that you're busy and you need to leave us at 12:40 for a select committee. So we appreciate you stepping out and sharing with us today. So now over to you, and just a reminder to unmute.
Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi aroha kia koutou, ngā kaimahi o te motu. I'll be succinct. So part of my background has been as an activist and a community person for the last 40 years, right up until I got elected in November. So I asked for the community and volunteer sector portfolio because this is something that I care deeply about. And I was surprised to find out that we were the only ones with a solid policy on this amongst the parties. But our policy says that we want a strong, independent tangata whenua, community and voluntary sector contributing to enhance our social, environmental, cultural, physical, spiritual and economic well-being. Our key areas is that we think that the funding for the community and voluntary sector should allow it to thrive, that communities should not have to rely on gambling revenue, that government should not infringe on the sector's independence, as we have especially seen recently, but we know that this happens all the time. That volunteering deserves better recognition and respect, and that government should actively support community economic development. After having a bit of a talk with Sue and Rochelle and Tessa earlier this week, I went back over the Greens' input into the development of the Charities Act. And back in 2004, I found a paper written by Sue Bradford that said, we've got major concerns about this bill. Concerned about the outdated definition of charitable purposes, concerned that the bill may restrict the ability of registered charities to carry out advocacy, that the registration is likely to become de facto compulsory as a shortcut for funders to determine if charities are legitimate, and it may load oppressive compliance costs on the sector. So all of these things and many more have come to fruition as we expected. And of course, Sue Bradford stood up in the House and expressed concerns about at the time that it was done in urgency, because all of these details, even though substantially written in the select committee phase, still went through with a lot of issues. And when we start from that place, then we are constantly trying to defend our right to exist and get on with our work while dealing with all the compliance issues that are happening. And so I wanted to confirm my commitment to this kaupapa, to our sector. And as I decide, I would appreciate input, and particular organisations would like to meet with me. Peak bodies is great so that we can focus in and say, what do you need me to do? If there was 3 things that I could work on in this term, what would those things be that I could advocate on your behalf into this crazy place where I've started work? So nō reira, I'll keep it there, and I am sorry that I won't be able to stay. We're having the water services bill hearings at the moment, and there are hundreds and hundreds of submissions. So kia ora.
Kia ora, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for taking the time out, and great to hear your commitment as well, working with the community and voluntary sector. And also we really love MPs who put up their hand and are keen to hear from us, from the sector itself. So kia ora tātou, that's fantastic. So now I'm going to hand over to Christina Howard. So Christina is an independent consultant. She was previously the director of the Todd Foundation. So she's got a very interesting perspective to speak with us from a philanthropy lens. And she's also been involved for some time in the Charities Act review conversations, and kōrero. So welcome, Christina.
Kia ora, Rochelle. Thanks so much, and lovely to be here today and see everyone on the call. So I should point out before I start that I am not speaking on behalf of the whole philanthropic sector. My remarks are coming from me. What I thought I would do is just sort of cover off briefly how funders use the charities register, which a couple of people have already touched on, and then talk about why I think this review is important. Philanthropy New Zealand did a submission to the Charities Act review, and that's available on their website. So if you want to see a broader view, there are some differences of opinion within the philanthropic sector, to say that. So that's why I wanted to say these are some of my thoughts as well. However, one thing I can say is that philanthropy thinks that the Act and reviewing the Act is important enough that when I was director at the Todd Foundation, the lovely Valerie, who I see is on the call, one of our team members, was able to coordinate and pull together a group of 12 funders who actually supported the work that Sue and Dave did, going around the country, talking to community organisations, highlighting that review is occurring and making sure they had all the information they needed to make a submission. So we think it's important. I think Sue's touched on the fact that, and Elizabeth both touched on the fact that funders actually use the Charities Register as a shortcut for understanding who they can fund. And that's because most funders are also registered charities, and in order to retain their charitable status, they need to only give money to organisations which are charities and which have a charitable purpose. And in the past, prior to the registration regime existing, we did that by asking anyone who was requesting money from us to send us a copy of their rules. So we would read the rules and make an assessment ourselves about whether we thought they were charitable. So the register basically provides a shortcut. If someone has a registration number, we can go and we can check if they're registered, and we can, if their annual returns are up to date, then we know we're pretty much good to go in terms of funding. And we can also check other information about the charity that's been provided in your performance reports, though there's sometimes a time lag in that, which isn't always helpful for us. But anyway, what is important to note as Sue did, is that you don't have to be, there's nothing legally that says that funders can only give to registered charities. You can be a registered a bona fide charity and not be registered. And in fact, the Charities Services have actually advised in the past smaller charities not to register if they think the compliance will be more than the benefit for them of registering. But as Elizabeth noted, what happens in practice often is that it just becomes a de facto requirement because funders don't have the time or want to spend the time doing that extra work. So I think given that most funders do use it at the moment and do use it as a shorthand, it's really important to fund seekers. And so making sure that the review hears and listens to the community voices on this is important. In my opinion, theoretically, registration should reduce the burden on fund seekers because you're providing all this information once in one place. You shouldn't have to provide it individually to different funders all the time. But I think the jury's out on whether that's actually the case. So just going on to what should the review cover, and these are sort of more my opinions, but I do really endorse Sue's point that a first principles review is needed. And in fact, I think that's really clear. Elizabeth talked about what the Green Party were concerned about, and I think she's correct. All of those things that she mentioned have come to pass. And so I think we really need to understand whether the benefit of the system is outweighing those deficits or the things that have been imposed that aren't so great. And really importantly, just like many other things, that the Charities Act includes tangata whenua and tikanga te ao Māori, but within a framework, a Western framework, and the charities law and the definition of charitable purpose goes right back to 15th century England. And I think we really have to ask ourselves how relevant that is for New Zealand today and how that may be excluding organisations within te ao Māori from the benefits of the charities registration. So yeah, you'll have to let me know if I'm running over time, Rochelle, but one of the things that I'm really aware of is that there is the Charities Registration and the Charities Act. It's actually created a huge compliance cost for charities and government. So last year it cost about $6.6 million to run charity services, and $830,000 of that came from annual return fees that were required to be paid by charities. And there's no information about how much admin cost of complying, of doing your annual returns and gathering all your information is actually paid by charities as well. So we don't know what that figure is, but it will, obviously be more. And as Sue said, that one of the reasons that were given was for creating this Charities Act back in 2004-2005 was the need to increase public trust and confidence in the charity sector. I think we need to be really sure that that goal has actually been achieved. There was some research conducted in the past about public trust and confidence in charities, but nothing before the Act came in, which makes it really hard to know whether or not there's been any change. However, it looks like overall public confidence has actually remained steady throughout the duration of the Act. And there's also some evidence that actually what influences people's trust and confidence isn't the presence of registration, but actually their personal experiences of charities and media reports about things that are going on. The other thing is, the other point I think it's really important is to ask, is the current regime actually stopping dodgy charities from being set up or preventing fraudulent activity? There is a really great example of this, which is the Charitable Foundation. That was its actual name, and it was a complete sham. It was registered as a charity in 2014, but it wasn't until 2017 when issues were raised by a journalist that an investigation was started. All of that is online on the spin-off if you want to read about that, the Charitable Foundation. And then it wasn't actually deregistered until 2020. So what's interesting for me, just looking at the figures that are published by the Charities Services, is that far more charities are deregistered due to not filing annual returns than because of wrongdoing. In fact, in the last 3 years, only 2 charities have been deregistered for wrongdoing, and the Charitable Foundation was one of them. 1,373 charities were deregistered because they'd failed to file a return. And we don't know how many of those were just because it was too onerous for people to do it. Information got lost. You know, we know how much turnover there can be in governance and management, particularly of small charities. And all of these charities are being deregistered potentially because the regime is too onerous. I think we really need to think about that and whether the cost of compliance is outweighing the benefit. The other point, and this is one that Valerie made that I want to give you credit for that, is that the funding needed to comply on the charity side is effectively just one more cost that needs to be fundraised for. So your donors, your funders are you know, effectively paying for the compliance process. And in general, I think we'd prefer to be paying for mission-focused activities rather than compliance. So I'm going to leave it there. I think that it's exceptionally important that that this review is occurring. I think the scope should be wider. And Sue just lightly touched on the fact that DIA now runs Charity Services, even though it was set up as an independent commission. And I think that is something else that really should be considered. There were good reasons for it being independent. It was supposed to be a cost saver to bring it under DIA, and actually it seems to cost more now than it did before.
Kia ora, thanks Christina. Next we move to our third speaker, Robyn Kiddle. So she's been running the Child Cancer Foundation and also operating in a number of community governance roles. So over to you.
Kia ora, Rochelle. Tēnā koutou katoa. Hard Act follows Sue and Christina, because I just sit here and I'm nodding the whole time. Yes, as Rochelle said, I've been head of Child Cancer Foundation for the last 7 years. I just left last month, and it was a real journey for me because I don't actually come from a not-for-profit or NGO or charitable sector. I actually come from the commercial sector. So I've people might say I've jumped the fence. But my observations were, and this is something that I think about the charitable sector. When the laws were first formed way back in the 15th century, even when the Charities Act came in 2005, all of us stand back and look at the landscape we now operate in. It's changed immeasurably and at a pace that I don't think anybody could have understood when legislation was first thought of, and I don't think that pace is going to change. So in my view, is you have a very tightly regulated environment, not just through the charities law, but through other legislative landscape that we need to work in, such as employment law, privacy law, health and safety. I can go on and on. I call charitable enterprises and our own organisation as social impact or a business with heart. And by that, I mean that we are motivated not by making a lot of money, but we have to make money. Not-for-profit is just an absolutely wrong, it's a misnomer. And anybody who operates one of these groups and thinks that they don't have to make money will not be operating. I think the reason that we're around also is that it also reflects the change in our communities where the government of the day can no longer afford to support the needs that are out there. So I only see this gap widening. So therefore, we are a very important part of the sector. And the other thing that really hits me every time I think about us as a sector is that Sue put up the slide about, I can't remember, 7 billion or something, or 8 billion in management assets. My comment to you is, what if we weren't here? If your charitable organisation didn't exist, what would that actually mean? And it's far bigger than $7 billion or whatever it is in investment. And that really is always, to me, it's a really important grounding thing for why I did what I did, because I knew the impact that we were having. So like everybody, I totally agree that it's time for this overhaul to happen. And I think why, you know, everything that previous speakers have said have really rung true with me. It's about bringing back a level of trust and confidence in the regulatory environment we have to work in. I think, this is my perspective, and just so that you understand the context that I'm coming from, I chair a small sporting foundation, a sporting organisation, $1.2 million turnover. I was CE of Child Cancer, which is about $6 million, and I'm also the deputy chair on SPCA, which is a huge organisation. So I see it from different perspectives. And what I see amongst all of them is that there is no trust of this regulatory body that we have to work with. So we have to get that trust back in. And yet, to your point, Christina, I don't think the Charities Commission or DIA, wherever charity sits now, has actually met the requirement that it was first being set up for the community to have confidence in charities. You don't have to set up something. You can't mandate that trust and confidence. Trust and confidence has to come from the way the charities or the organisations themselves act. And karma will happen to those who act irresponsibly. I think the number of deregistrations during the year, I'm kind of sit on the fence with that. I think it's probably a lot of smaller organisations, or actually no, there's another side of it. There's also merging that's happening. And so I'll give you an example. Give you the example of SPCA. SPCA, from memory, was around 27 differently incorporated societies. It's now one. So the rest of those have been deregistered. So I think that's going to have an impact. But I think also it is the smaller charities who just go, this is just too hard. And what an indictment on society that we're making it hard for people to do good. It's just wrong. And I know, you know, I'm a firm believer, maybe I'm naive, but I believe it's the 80-20 principle, although I'm hoping it's about 95-5 principle that works in this not-for-profit sector, where 95% of us are here for the right reasons. And you will always have bad apples. You have bad apples in business. And yet I would contend that I think sometimes the charitable sector is being held to a higher standard than businesses. And yet we are not here to make money. We're here to actually impact people's lives. So and I think it needs to be first principles. I was very honoured to sit in on the sprint with Sue last week around the definition of a charitable purpose. And I learned so much from that. It's just incredible, the minds that are out there and the breadth of conversation that needs to go on. And it's a shame that Elizabeth can't be with us, but she would hear this, that, you know, please listen to us. We're here. Those of us that are here and have been here for quite a while actually have insight that we can bring, so that we can bring something that's workable, that's pragmatic, and to a certain extent can address future issues. But I would hate to think that we have this reform of the Charities Law Act, let's say this year or next year, and nobody touches it for the next 50 years, because we'll be having these safe, well, I won't be, but you know, those of us younger than me will be having the same conversation again in 50 years, and that's just inequitable as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, that was kind of me. And I think also too, to what Sue has said, I think there's an overwhelming desire to be part of the solution to this, and to be part of the solution of the place in society that charities have. I don't think our wider community understands what the charitable sector brings to communities and how important they are. And I know that from the work that I had to do in child cancer, for them to even understand what the charity I worked for did. Oh yeah, I'll give you some money, go away, it'll be fine. Well, hang on, listen about the impact that we make in people's lives. So yeah, I'll get off my little soapbox now, but that's why I'm really quite passionate about this, even though I'm not actively involved in the sector at the moment. It's got to happen, and I'd love to be part of the solution. Thank you, Rochelle, for the opportunity.
Kia ora, thanks, Robyn. So now I'm just, before we go to take some questions, I'm putting up a poll, which is what needs to be the most important focus area for charities law reform. So you might still be not sure, but we're going to put some options up now so that you can see. So feel free to vote on what you think. So a clearer understanding of charitable purpose in New Zealand, that includes the needs of tangata whenua, and suits also non-Māori charities, whether charity services should go back to being an independent commission, whether the registration and reporting requirements would match the size of the charities. So there would be a small registration and reporting for small charities, or large for large. The compliance costs for charities and government, for those running charities, you know how much work it takes to do reporting. Something else, or you're not sure. All right, so at the moment, most people are saying a definition of charitable purpose that suits modern Aotearoa. So we've talked quite a lot about this in preparation for today. You know, the difference between a very old law and legal system that was set up, and how that doesn't match what we're actually delivering on the ground to communities in Aotearoa. Great. So 60% of you think that charitable purpose that suits modern Aotearoa, 13% charity services going back to be independent, 7% to have registration reporting meet charity size, 7 for all of these, reduce compliance for charities and government, something else, and I'm not sure. So that's good. We got some people to clearly at a sort of point at this point. So we're keen to take questions. We will finish at 1 o'clock, but if you have an extra half an hour, you're welcome to stay on. We officially finish at 1, but we do leave that last half an hour if people want to stay on, and we just split you into breakout rooms. If you just really want to extend your peer-to-peer networks, meet some new people around the country, you're welcome to do that. It's completely optional, but we will finish by 1. So there was one question which picked up on the stats that you were mentioning, Christina, about the stats about deregistration, and wondering why that was. Do we know if charity services reached out to those people and offered them support, or whether they just got a notification saying unless you return your reporting by this time, you'll be automatically deregistered?
So unfortunately, Rochelle, I don't know the answer to that question. I do want to just respond to Robyn's point, though. That 1,373 were those who were deregistered because they'd failed to file a return. There were an additional 1,818 voluntary deregistration. So that will be the people who've merged or done other things. So those are the people who've said, yes, I want to be deregistered. Those 13,000 have just been dropped off. So yes, I don't know. I haven't seen any research. I know that often that Charities Services definitely offers the grace period, because you can go back and say that there are people who have not filed their return for the previous year and are still waiting on the current year. But I would hope that they're doing some work on that, but I don't know if they've done any analysis. And I think, again, that's one of those things that should be part of a review. Let's unpack that and work out what's going on.
I know we, the first in this series that we held last week, which was about the review going on with the External Reporting Board around Tier 3 and Tier 4 charities, that particularly Tier 4 charities, so that's 125,000 revenue or under. So a lot of those will be primarily volunteer organisations. And there was a lot of discussion on that call and session about just the huge amount of reporting that's required to report back to charities registration. At the same time, we had them on the call, and they were saying it was never set up to be like this, that a lot of the questions are optional. The charities were saying, we feel like we have to get lawyers or accountants to enable us to report. So we've already worked with them to pass on that information. They're going to start to look at how to make the reporting much easier, particularly for the small charities that are not resourced. And it should never be set up that you actually need an accountant just to report back for you. There should be a very simplified process. Any other questions from who's listening? I'm particularly interested around about the Charities Commission shifting back into being an independent body. I think that I'm interested to just maybe Robyn, you could talk about your thoughts about that. So it used to be, then it was moved into Department of Internal Affairs as a process of other things that were also going on across government. What are your thoughts about that?
I would totally endorse it going back to being an independent organisation. I think that's one of the foundational building blocks of building trust back into the service from the people that need to use it, which is not so much the philanthropic organisations, but definitely the charities. I mean, we had to do returns to DIA, and I just went, oh, here we go, another government department. Who's looking at this? What are they really using it for? And, I have never viewed the DIA as someone, charity services inside DIA, as someone that I could go to assistance for. I just look at them as a reporting block that needs to happen. So I would really endorse an independent Charities Commission, but I think that when it goes, here am I being optimistic, when it goes back to being independent, I think there should also be a discussion about what should it be, because what it was when it was an independent commission may not necessarily be relevant going forward, and that's what this is all about, is being relevant and supporting the sector. It's hard. I mean, I'm also part of another group at the moment about the national governance strategy for community governance strategy. I don't know if any of you on this call know about that, but that's another call from the sector going, we do not have a central hub of information and brains and knowledge. We go everywhere, and for a sector that's as big as what it is, it's not right. So listen to this sector. It's really calling out for help.
And I think picking up in the chat, you're talking about support for the sector. And I think absolutely, for example, if you need to report back and you're a newly registered charities, where do you go for that? And the reality is there is no core place at this point to go to get help for that. You can ring charity services, but I would imagine that they have limited resource even within them to actually help support you within the sector, and having an independent body that can help you work out what to report would be best. So any final thoughts, Christina, before we start to finish up?
I just think, picking up on the discussion you've just been having, my observation has been that the solution to these problems is always, let's better educate charities, let's make them more aware of what they need to do for governance, let's give them templates so that they can do their reporting, blah blah blah. It's never, let's look at what we're doing and see how we can change it. And I think that's the key point that needs to go through into the review, is these things aren't inevitable, they've been created. Let's create things that actually work for the people who need them, and for the communities that benefit from the work that charities are doing.
Kapai, thank you. So just to finish up, we have another poll. when I just get to it. Just to finish up before we end the session, and a reminder that you're welcome to stay on. We'll do the poll, then Iris will finish with a karakia whakamutunga, and then we'll finish up. If you'd like to stay, feel free to stay on for a bit more kōrero. So the last question is, what do you think is the best way forward for the Government Charities Act review? So that's government continues with the current review process, taking into account the 363 submissions that have already been received back in 2018-19. Use co-design workshops with the sector to rewrite the Act. So actually helping the sector actively co-create what's needed. Transfer the review to an independent body, for example, the Law Commission. So this is another option that's on the table. That's a longer option, so that's probably about 5 or so years to get to that point, but that leads on from the review that they did of the incorporated societies, which was very well received. Cancel the review altogether because maybe there's other better priorities for the sector or other more relevant immediate priorities, something else, or you're not sure. All right. So generally, again, the you can see here from the results, we've got 60% wanting the community sector to be actively involved in the rewrite and redesign of the Act. 20% thinking about transferring it to the Law Commission, and 7% carrying on, one person carrying on with the current review process. So kia ora everybody, thank you so much. It has been recorded today and that will be up on Hui's Facebook page and on our YouTube channel as well. We will load that up. We will also send you out a brief survey. It's really helpful for feedback. Today is part of the Hui's summer series, so this is the second session. We've got 2 more coming up. Next week is where can non-profit chief executives find support, and the final section is on improving community sector and government relationships. So same time, same place. We'd love to see you there. And now I'll just hand over to Iris to close us out.
Kia ora no tātou, ngā mihi atu kia koutou ngā paipai o kōrero, and so those people who have been on our paipai today and engaging us in the kōrero, ngā mihi atu kia koutou katoa. E karakia ma whakamutunga I tēnei wā. Inoi tātou. Kia tātou katoa. Te ata whai o tō tātou ariki o Kiriketi, me te aroha te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, a ke tonu atu. Āmene. Kia ora.